service provider has been exactly how you would expect internet service providers to be. And I've been just getting horrible upload speed the past couple days, so hopefully getting it fixed. I tried to downscale my bit rate on Streamlabs. For those of you who don't know what that means, I'm trying to fix it. Doing my best to do an old fixer-up. So hopefully this works. If you still see lag on your end, please let us know in the chat, and we will kind of deal with it accordingly. Anyway, hi Devin.
How's it going?
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Don't worry about it, man. It's all good. I'm working while we're talking, so whenever you're ready, I'm good to go.
Hell yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump back into it. So, Puzzle and Snuggle. So,
yeah,
for those of you who are just tuning in because you got the notification that we just went live, Devin's been talking about this project that he's working on, this like huge collaborative multimedia effort that has two sides of it. One is called Puzzle, the other of which is called Snuggle. He's told us about kind of how they came to be and, you know, how everybody got involved and what the process has been like with Puzzle for the most part, and was just kind of getting into the aptly named Snuggle part of the project.
It's like a toilet paper from the 80s, I think.
I think it is.
Yeah.
It's the one with the... No, that's Huggies. Yeah, with the bears, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, it's a tragic name, man. But it's also... There's a part of my... when I'm trying to think of names for something, or when I'm trying to figure out what something's going to be called, you know, you have to follow your intuition. And oftentimes I'll land on something that, even if it's ridiculous, if my intuition is like, no, that's clearly what it's supposed to be, then we just go with it. And I remember when the Snuggles name came up, I was like, dude, that's the stupidest thing ever. I was like, yeah, but right. And so I just went with it. But I also feel that this whole period, as traumatic as it has been for a lot of people, for me has offered some really unique opportunities amidst the trauma, of which, of course, you know, as a human being on Earth in 2020 and 2021,
yeah,
it's traumatic for me as well, right? But being forced to learn a lot of this new technology, being forced to sort of pivot the career. My work today, for example, is I'm finishing up 14 episodes of this kids show for the BBC in the UK.
That's right.
Where I've done the soundtrack and all this stuff for it. And that's another thing I've never participated in. I've never had to work with a committee of people. I've never had to line things up with all these things and what the slating is and you know, things I found out yesterday, like if you're 0.2 milliseconds over the cutoff, then that goes into the documented length of the episode. It's just all these little things.
That's wild.
But it just seems like everything I learn, I was saying to my wife the other day, it's like you forget something else. It's like I learned how to do this BBC thing, but I forget what grandma smells like. I think it has a lot to do with almond roca and cigarettes stuff.
Yeah. It's on the tip of my nose, but these goddamn kids shows.
All these kid shows.
Sacrifices.
It's actually not kids music. When it first started, I thought it was going to be like da 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 da, but it's kind of cool. They've kind of done it like a Planet Earth style thing, right?
Oh,
so
that's
cool, man.
So it's like big like composition type of stuff.
Yeah,
yeah, super sick.
Yeah. It's all right, actually. It gave me an opportunity again to learn something, which is good. And
I feel like
it's like.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You first.
You owe me a Coke.
No, go.
Okay. No, I was gonna say it's super important that I think that people kind of take that away from this past year and moving forward. That it's like, you know, I was just talking to one of my neighbors about this because she works in like the education field, and she's like, yeah, you know, we had to switch from, you know, all this stuff, and I'm having my employees do all these, you know, performance evaluations, and like there's no incentive really because like the company isn't giving out raises and they're not doing all this stuff because of all these different things that are happening. But like the incentive is that like 5 years from now, you know, you'll still have retained all of this information that was kind of like forced upon you, that you'll have
potentially
that you'll have like had to, you know, you've had to learn all these new tools and these new skills, and like even if things go back to a brick and mortar type of setup, which I feel like so many businesses just aren't going to, because why would you pay the overhead on a building after doing all this? But that aside, the things you learn, you know what I mean? The things that you learn and you take away from this whole experience, I think is something that is massively important to like everyone
Agreed.
involved.
I think there's also um, there's a certain learned process of incorporating tenacious behavior into these sorts of occurrences. I mean, it's so crazy, and the Groundhog's Day and the unease and the anxiety and the uncertainty makes it such that oftentimes your incentive to do anything is diminished. You just want to disappear, right?
Mm-hmm.
But getting up and getting through it and working through it and dealing with these problems as they arise and finding solutions to things that seem insurmountable, all these are also skill sets that of course will benefit us. I like to think that all this learning as well will help stave off early onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Because I think back to all the like dope I smoked out of beer cans when I was a kid, and I think,
Yeah.
oh, it's like hopefully this will counteract a bit of that,
You
right?
know, keep my brain cells at a nice even keel instead of like the rapid decline that they've just been on for
Yeah, man.
for my entire life. Uh, yeah, for sure. You know, it's funny the takeaway from these names. While you were like kind of first explaining it, I was like, oh, like puzzle, that makes sense because it's like there's all these different pieces, right? It's like a puzzle. It's like you're putting together all this stuff.
Right.
And then Snuggle, I was like, oh, but like that also kind of makes sense because there's all these people involved and it's like a big
Mhm.
snuggle puddle. It's like a
Totally.
big, you know, musical
Yeah.
fucking cuddle fest.
That's
Uh,
exactly what it is. That's
that's
exactly what. And in fact, as we were talking here and we were resetting the stream, I've been asking. Again, there's like 40 musicians slash artists slash freaks that are involved with this, and I asked them all to take photos as if we're doing a Zoom call. So for the layout of this, it's just going to be all these people in this massive Zoom call.
yeah.
And everybody's got the headphones on, just sort of participating like this. But I think that there's an interesting, I mean, puzzle for me, although maybe not nervous, that's not the right word, but it's so weird, man. It's like I think it's so fucking cool, and it's hyper emotional too. It's like it shouldn't bust me up in the way that it busts me up, but it totally does, man. It's
Yeah.
like heavy, man, but it's super weird. So as I was listening through to it last night, and I hear all these people, like everywhere you listen, it's like, oh, there's that person, there's that, there's my buddy, there's this, there's the. It's like a weird neural net that gets created as a result of sort of having to cope with the technological limitations of this. There was a couple of
Oh.
in mind developed called Licento. And basically what it is you can open up your DAW on one side, and then I had a friend that was in Sweden, and he opened it up on his side. So I'm in Vancouver, he's in Sweden. That's half a world away. And he puts an auxiliary track up on his, puts the receiver app on that. I put the send app on my master bus, and then we link in over the internet, and we can participate in 2448 with like 7 milliseconds of latency. So
Right.
while he was tracking drums, I can record it on my Pro Tools system almost in real time, right?
That is
It's
so sick.
it's super sick, but it's a pain in the ass, of course. It's
Yeah.
like it's more by the end of it, once we both got over the fact that it was happening, we were just like, this is, yeah, I don't know if this is gonna work, but how badass is that?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, man, I when all this first happened and everyone started trying to jump on like the streaming thing, you know, I had been streaming like video game stuff for, you know, several years prior, and was like, okay, well, let's just take what I know and already kind of shifted into music. And I was, you know, able to help out some friends get like their interfaces set up and get, you know, everything looking good on like a Streamlabs type of thing. But the biggest hurdle ended up being, you know, which I'm sure you've had to deal with as well, is the whole like, I need to capture my desktop audio with my streaming software, but I also need
Oh,
to
what
like,
a pain in the ass.
dude, like, and I tried to
And
watch like
Loopback,
tutorials of people that have like,
Soundflower.
oh my god, like the people
It's a
who've
pain
been
in
like,
the ass.
and I looked at Matt Hafey from Trivium, his whole
He helped
like
me.
setup.
He helped me.
Yeah,
Yep.
that
He's one of the
tracks
guys that helped me, man.
because his whole setup, and I watched it, and he was like, well, I've got like this laptop dedicated to this and this
Yep.
computer dedicated to this, and I've
Yep.
got like my hardware interfaces right here, and like here's my
Yep.
compression modules and like all this other stuff, and then this thing goes out to my mic. And I was just like, oh my god. A friend of mine, Brody Utley from a band called Rivers of Nile,
Oh, of course.
he figured out a pretty cool way to do it, using Voice Meter Banana. But even still, it's like such a nightmare. And
Yeah, I did this live stream with the Nail the Mix guys, and they were kind enough, because they work with Rode. They had Rode send me out this thing called the Podcaster Pro, which is, it's one of those. It's got like sample pads and a bunch of inputs and everything, but it also acts as a separate audio interface with an input. So I ended up finding a really easy solution with that, where I would just take a headphone out with a 1/8" jack into the input of the Podcaster Pro, and then I would set my Streamlabs input to the Podcaster Pro, and then use Pro Tools for the rest of it. And it actually was like really efficient. But I also found that, there's so many people that ended up doing Twitch streams, and I do it when I can, but I find a lot of my efforts are best spent at this point trying to create this content. And I really, really appreciate my audience, and I really try and stay connected to them. But over the past couple of months, when this puzzle project really became foremost in my mind, I think it was in my best interest to say to the audience, which I did, I need a couple of months to get this out of my system, because I can't do two things at once. Yeah. It's like, even at home, I've told the story a few times, but it's the case. It's my wife will say, well, I need you to fix the hinge on the back door. And I was like, I can do that next Thursday.
Yeah.
And she's like, dude, it'll take you 3 minutes. And I was like, it'll take me 25 minutes now and I'll fuck it up. Or it'll take me 3 minutes Thursday when I've decided to do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's it's when my head's in one place, it's best for me to stay there. Right.
Absolutely. And the time management thing, I think is another testament to like
huge,
how
huge.
creatives have been dealing with this whole process, is that it's like
huge,
it's natural for creative people to be like, I'm going to work on this project and this project and this project and this project and do all these different things, and like really use all this extra time that I haven't had over the past couple of years because of touring or album cycles or whatever it might be, to like, do all these projects and get everything done. But then the part that like is often left out is the time management part.
Yeah, but I think that discipline is underrated. And when I started anything, meditation or exercise, like physical exercise, it wasn't necessarily to get ripped, clearly, but it's like to have something that I do every day, like without fail, it develops that sort of sense of, okay, well, you have to compartmentalize these efforts so that when it's time to do this, you can make that shift, you can make that change. And so often when I'm talking to people, they say, well, you tend to get a lot done. That process doesn't make sense to me, because it seems like you'd have no time to sleep, you'd have no time to chill. And I'm like, well, I do have time to sleep and I do have time to chill. And a lot of that is because that practice of anything, whether or not it's being a vegetarian or anything, something that imposes subtle degrees of discipline on your daily day, it's that same mechanism that applies to time management. So similar to you, it's like I wake up when it's time for the kid to go to school. I do my morning routine. I have my breakfast. I make sure that while I'm making my coffee, I turn everything on, so when I get out here, I can just focus. And I go until lunch, and then I take a break, and then I go until 4, and then I exercise, and I have dinner, and then I watch some TV. Then I get back to work until 10, and then, you know what I mean? It's like, yep. And by doing that, it's not super sexy, because it's not like you've got all this time to sort of twiddle your thumbs and be like, wow, man, I wonder if we just, it's like that isn't the thing necessarily. But the bottom line is it's if you've got objectives that you can sort of check off your list, you can get a lot done. I actually saw a thing, it was Danny Elfman or or Hans Zimmer, they were doing one of those masterclass things that I had like a link to, and they had mentioned that when they're scoring for a movie, they've got objectives they need to reach every day in terms of time. So if it's a 90-minute 90-minute duration, and they've got a certain amount of time they've got to take into consideration, if we want to have the weekends off, if we want to do exercise, if we want to do whatever, we're going to have to complete 2 minutes of music every day until this date, right? And I think that that level of time management during this particular period has been one of the biggest things that I've come away from it integrating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar thing can be said about, not only the musical projects that I've been working on, but, as I'm sure the listeners are tired to death of hearing of, because I talk about it every podcast, is the video game company that I started. Is that it's like, you have to create blocks of time and, like you said, set those objectives where it's like, okay, this is what I need to get done today. The thing that I do that has kind of helped me with that is every night before I go to bed, I'll open up like a Word document on my computer and make like an actual semi-physical to-do list for the next day that I can just like wake up, start it open, open it up and just start cracking off things that are on that list, and be like,
dude, you gotta start cracking off.
You gotta start cracking off, cracking one off every 5 minutes or so. Just crack with something off that list.
Man, that goes down during this whole period too. You're just like, oh fuck, I'm just gonna bat it around for a while and go to bed.
I was bored,
Yeah, man. I find that actually it can, like, in that same line of thinking that you're talking about before you go to bed, something that actually really helped me, and I don't know if it's the same for you, is I took the devices out of my bedroom too. It's so after a certain time during the day, like, they're physically not around me, like the phone or the iPad or computer, anything. It's because I've had insomnia for as many years as I can remember, but I feel physically much less capable of handling lack of sleep now than I used to. So sleep has become a very important part of my productivity. It's like, okay, so no devices, read before you go to bed, to the point where the book hits you in the face or what have you. It's usually only a couple of pages.
Yeah.
And if I only had like 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, which obviously sometimes happens just due to schedule or insomnia, like, I feel really dumb. And that just, it's too much in the day to deal with for me to have that as my underlying psychological condition. I'm a dumbass today. And go.
That was a huge part of COVID recovery for me, because of course I caught it because I'm in America, but I when I had it, like, the fogginess, like the disorientation that came along with it was super gnarly. But even still, I'll have days where, like, that same fogginess kind of settles in, and it definitely has a lot to do with, like, sleep and nutrition and just how my body is being treated outside of, those symptomatic flare-ups.
I've had a lot of friends who went through COVID as well, and that's something that seems to be, by and large, one of the most difficult parts of it. It's just getting through that fogginess mentally, right?
Things that would normally take me 30 seconds would take me an hour. It was wild. It was
that sucks, buddy.
Super unique set of symptoms.
Well, that's the guy from Nail the Mix, EL. He had it as well, and he just said, "Oh, it's a flavor that I didn't know existed until I got it." Right?
100%. So, moving on to some more of these questions I have, because some of them are very, very good. Don't want to miss out on any of this sweetness, but the creative techniques that you have made, with the creative techniques that we've kind of been talking about, you've made probably more music, than anyone that we've talked to on the show so far. And you've kind of gone into the whole, creative process and why you do it. And I don't want to continue to beat that into the dirt, but, has making all of this music kind of educated you on the nature of yourself and your motivations?
That's the purpose. The music doesn't mean shit, really. It really doesn't. And it's it's funny because people say, "Oh, you remember this song?" And I was like, "No."
Yeah.
Or I'll hear a song come up and I was like, "Oh, I did that? I don't remember."
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, but I don't know what's coming next, as I'm listening
Right.
to it. And I think something that I have uh, struggled to convey to people has been that, and maybe it's just our genre, where there seems to be a need to claim the work as being something that we as creators are directly responsible for. But I don't feel that. And in fact, I say maybe it's just our genre because when I was watching a documentary the other day about an artist in the UK. I forget her name, Maggie something, great, super eccentric. And she said the only thing that she claims is the bad stuff. Said the
Yeah.
rest of the stuff, the good stuff, is because she was aware enough of her own trip to get out of the way of her creative inclinations. And I
Right.
think that's super important to remember, is that you're, as a creative, you're in service of the work. It's not you. And I got a buddy who's critical of that. He says, I think it's just because you're insecure and you don't want to say, oh, it's my music or whatever. But I think as musicians, you listen for things much more so than create things. You just listen, and then in your head, you're like, oh, that's the next note,
Yeah.
or that's the next note. And I find for myself, like she had said in this interview, when I write something that doesn't work, it's because there's too much me in it. But when I write something, or when something gets written that really does work, I'm like, oh God, I was hopefully nowhere to be found in that.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember. So with me and the amount of work that I've done, it's not based on trying to accumulate records or put together some sort of CV that's impressive. It's just in the process of trying to unfuck myself. It's like that's what the result was. When I
Right.
was 25, it's City and or Alien or Synkestra or Infinity. It's like all these things. And now Puzzle, for example, I didn't expect this. I didn't sit down and say, you know what I really think would be cool would be a 2-record thing with a movie that's all about, the chaos and then the resolution. It's like I just follow it as um as openly as I can. And then in the ways that it seems the most um uh in the ways that my compulsions seem to guide me, I'm like, that's the thing that interests me, that sound, that thing. I follow that, and then eventually it almost inevitably ends up in something that I didn't expect. I'm like, oh shit. And then when it's done, I can listen to it and say, okay, well, that's a much more accurate description of your frame of mind than had I sat down and tried to pen something about the pandemic, for
Right.
example.
Right.
How Do I Feel by Devin Townsend. You know what I mean? It's like, well, it all
Yeah.
started in March. It's like, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. But if I just sit there and be like, go, open up your session, pick up a guitar, go. You don't feel like going, don't go.
Yeah.
Do something else. And then by the end of it, it just ended up in this thing that I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's a really accurate description,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 100%. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I find that that's a huge struggle for me personally, and I feel like a lot of listeners might be able to relate to this. Is that it's like that unfiltered creativity, right? Like you said, the stuff that like has no you in it, like before your brain starts working on what your
Exactly.
emotions are producing,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is oftentimes like the best thing, which is why you hear all these stories about like, oh, yeah, like the Power Rangers song was like this guy took 3 months to write it, and then it got he turned it into the network the night before it needed to come out, and they hated it, so he had to just like rewrite it all in one night. And like it's like you let those walls down of like this is my piece and this is this music that I'm working on. But I feel like those bursts for a lot of people just exist in like windows. And so you'll get this like big burst and you'll put down like a section of a song or a piece of music, and then you know some time goes by and eventually you just start like overthinking it, and it gets to this point where you're like, okay, like shit, like I've like you said, put too much me into this and I need to set aside the project. What I've done to kind of like counteract that is that I usually have like a stack of quarters sitting next to my desk, like 10, 11, 12 of them. And depending on the song or the piece of music that I'm working on, whether it's metal or electronic music or whatever it might be, I'll take, anywhere between like 6 and 10 of these quarters, and every time I open my project file, I spend a quarter, right? And I only allow myself until I'm at the bottom of my stack of quarters to continue, working on this one particular project, because oftentimes it's just an expression thing. It's not like I'm working on this because I need to meet an album deadline and I need to do all this stuff. And it's oftentimes just like, how much can I capitalize on those windows of creativity? And I feel like through that process, I've now been able to like start a session and finish a session within one like 4 or 5 hour window, because I've just been able to like let that creativity flow. Uh, and it sounds like you kind of have a process as well for like taking advantage of those things, and like that kind of awareness of like not injecting too much of yourself or your ego or your whatever it might be into your music.
I don't know if I have a process. I mean, I go for walks and I
Yeah.
try and exercise and I try and do meditation and whatever, but it's like I sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think my biggest hurdle, and luckily I'm pig-headed enough to get past this one without too much effort, is that I function in two ways. In one way, I just go without thinking at all. But while it's happening, the other side of me is like, oh, this sucks. You're going to fuck it up. No one's going to like it. And so I think that the biggest hurdle for me to get through with any project is to not pay attention to that, right?
Yeah.
But I find that my schedule being as busy as it is right now allows that to sort of take a backseat, because there's just no time to second guess.
Mm-hmm.
And puzzle, for example, is things act, I think, as analogies as well creatively. Whether or not we choose to appreciate it as such, I think it inevitably does. And the analogy that puzzle really hammered home for me is that by presenting all these artists these sketches that I was then manipulating into some sort of form, typically what happens is when you work with a producer, where you work in a band, there's like one guy, one girl, that whoever, one person that calls it as is. So on this section here, on the bass, I want you to do this. The guitar is, oh, that's cool, but it's not right. It needs to be melodic minor. It can't be, just whatever. And then everybody, you might have these great musicians, but they're all they've got shackles on them, where they're like, oh, okay, well, this guy's the leader and he's got the record deal, so sure, melodic minor is,
Right.
But with this, I wanted to try something different, because I've been guilty of that for a lot of my career. But with this, I just took people and they said, what do you want us to do? And I said, anything. Doesn't matter. Do whatever you want and send it to me. And then my role in this will be deciphering it. So if you look at all these things that you get back as puzzle pieces, I get thousands of pieces and I can't use them all. So there's not only the letting go of telling people what to do, that was super cathartic, because I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that. And that's fucking awesome. But there's also this other part of it that's like, okay, I've got 10 geniuses that are all playing at the same time. Who do you choose?
Yeah.
And there's this process of having to make decisions that are hard to make. That was an analogy in my mind to this whole period. Like, we all have had to make decisions that are really difficult without that sort of traditional sense of, well, I'll make this decision because the news tells me it's the right thing, or the government tells me it's the right thing, or my mom tells me, whatever it is. There's like, who do we believe? No one knows. Everybody's got a different opinion. So it's up to us to make our choices based on what our information is, and roll with that. And so making these decisions in the structure of the puzzle project was an analogy for that in a ton of ways. And it's difficult, but it's also good practice. You're like, okay, so you've got all this brilliant stuff. What do you choose? Well, what does your intuition want? Your intuition thinks that's the one. Okay, that's the one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not to harp on the whole like trusting your intuition as a creative person idea, but it's just super interesting to me hearing. It's almost like confirmation, right? Like hearing it from another person, where it's just like, yeah, this is, you know, this creative process, and this is how you kind of move through it, and this is how you kind of decipher the movements of what's going on creatively in your head and turn it into something tangible that you know is kind of in spite of that other voice in your head. And the thing that I've always kind of taken away from that other voice whenever it kind of pops up being like, this isn't good enough, people are going to hate this, it's terrible, is that like once I release something, it's not mine anymore. Like,
And it's not perfect either.
yeah, and it never will be. And it's like,
Nope.
when I look back at an album that I made 2 years ago and I listen to it and like feel embarrassed, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a sign of growth as a musician and as a creative person.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or I think it's a sign of growth if you're, in my opinion, if you're not like hung up on it not being perfect, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I was for years. I would do something and listen back, and I'm like, oh, listen to that snare. It sounds like a bag of shit. And
Yeah.
then you think, okay, well, the legitimacy of that piece of music is invalidated by the fact that now you like a different snare sound. It's rather than, man, I worked as hard as I could possibly have worked at that time. There was no part of me that was like, you know what I really want with this sound right now is a shitty snare. Like that's what I'm looking for with this song right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like, dude, that was the best snare that I could do at the time. And I think that in a sense, I stopped looking at comment sections years ago.
Oh yeah.
Just because it's a lot of times people are right. And by right, I don't mean that their opinion is correct about it, but right in that it isn't a great sounding snare, but it doesn't help me to be berated by people
Right.
that I don't know about something that I'm already aware of, right? But I do think it's really important to stay vigilant about the truth of your work. I'm so fortunate that I've got friends around me and family around me that tell me when I'm full of it.
Yeah.
It's like most of my relationships that are near and dear to me are like 30, 35-year-old relationships. And none of them are going to be like, yeah, man, it's really a good sounding snare. No, I think it's cool. They're going to be like, dude, of course, what are you talking about? This snare sucks, man,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And having that support circle, I feel, is important to a lot of creative people. Every once in a while you get these anomalies of people who are just like completely isolated, and their creativity just stems from this like unknown well of just fucking influences and shit. But oftentimes
They
it's
don't
like,
get invited to parties.
yeah.
No one wants them around. Like, yeah, dude, you're awesome. All right.
They're all in hardcore bands about how everyone sucks. It's weird.
Oh my God, yeah. They can't seem to keep a bass player,
But we're mostly a product of our creative environment, and like the people that we trust and their feedback and all this kind of these
For
circles
sure.
of support when it comes to creative people. And I feel
Sure.
like most creatives really need that, in order to flourish.
There's a couple of buddies of mine that I'm just like, I don't ask them their opinion because we like each other enough that I know what his opinion is, and he likes me enough that he's not going to tell me because he knows it's going to bum me out.
Yeah.
But I think it's important. I really think it's important. And I think that it's small adjustments every day in relationships too. I think that's something that's taken for granted. One of the things that I really have found come to the forefront during this pandemic, I guess, is the fact that the value of certain people in my life and me in return to them is much more obvious now when we need each other on practical levels.
Yeah.
And there's certain people in my life that maybe prior to this, I had convinced myself that I really liked them or they were buddies of mine, but maybe it's just my ego going, oh, because he's famous or something, I'm going to tolerate a bunch of shit.
Right.
But with this year, I'm like, nah, that guy's a pain in the ass, man. But buddy down the street, like he's got my back, right?
Yeah,
And vice
absolutely,
versa.
man. Well, in the interest of not keeping you here all day, I do have a couple questions from some fans before I wrap it up.
Sure,
but they're actually both from a peer of mine. This guy named Mario Infantes, who's a Spanish singer living in Iceland, singer for a band called Cult of Lilith, and he asks, which I'll read it. Feel free to not answer it because we've already kind of talked about this. But he wants to know, I wonder, where do you take inspiration these days? What inspires you to create mostly? Is it other artists, movies, books, or life itself? And you've kind of already nailed it on the head with that one, and that it's just like, just tackling what
I
you're
think,
feeling at the moment, right?
yeah, but I
Yeah.
also think I'll add one more thing to that. I think what really inspires me is I went through a moment with music a couple of years back where I think it's very easy to go down nihilistic pathways
Hmm.
where if you're prone to overthinking, which I've always been, it's easy to have these pathways lead to, well, everything is ultimately futile. Like that seems to be like, and for me, and I think it's because I'm not, I don't claim to be, I don't claim to know anything. And I think that nihilistic attitude for me was often a product of things that I guess I didn't understand.
Right.
And that led me to feeling that what's the point of music? Like, what's the point of this? It's
Yeah.
like I pick up the guitar and I'd be playing something. I'm like, that's stupid, stupid. I don't need this. It's just music is ultimately this futile um, waste of time that is based on me wanting to have validation by people just so I can have some sort of sense that I exist by having it reflected in others, right?
Yeah.
That was starting to happen. But then I heard something that really helped, and it was, you're a human being, you don't understand anything. I don't understand anything. So music rather is an expression of gratitude for the things that are important to you. Your pet, your body, your family, your health, the fact that we are eating, the fact that we got a roof over our head. And so when I changed it from thinking that music was ultimately like a futile, ego driven thing to just like, oh, I don't know shit, but there's things in my life I'm super thankful for. And music for me is a reflection of that. Then that really helped. So that's what I would add to that.
That's awesome. That is uh, incredibly insightful, and I think can be taken in a
I
lot of
wish it
different
was me.
directions. Yeah,
I wish I had said
right.
it.
Well, I think that what you take from it is important, and it's like I think that that sentiment can be taken in a lot of different directions. You know what I mean? It's like not
I
only
agree.
the things that you're grateful for, but the things that make you sad, or the things that that you witness, while driving. Like, oh, wow, the beat of this song is matching these pedestrians crossing the street. Wow, life imitating art. Ha ha ha! Look at that. And then
Hmm.
like you get inspired to go create a song. You go, you do something that,
That's a good point. That's a
yeah.
good point, man.
So it's I think that, yeah, like I said, that sentiment can be taken and like ran with, not only what you're grateful for, but all the other things that
That you're aware of.
yeah, that coexist in your day to day experience. It's
That's awesome.
super super insightful. It makes me want to like get off this interview and go write songs.
Let's do it.
But, yeah, right. And then he had one more question that I think is a little bit more of like uh, an Ask Devin advice question. So Mario asks, do you still have insecurities during live performances even after decades of touring?
Oh, dude.
If
Fuck it.
so, how do you confront those insecurities when it happens?
Okay, two parts to that.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, man. It's like I remember when the whole pandemic first started. I've been on the road for 30 years.
Yeah.
In fact, at night now, for the past 3 months, every night, how I wind down is I drink this green tea and watch these 9 hour train videos, like from the cab view in Norway, because it makes me feel like I'm on a bus. It's
Yeah.
like that sense of momentum. Well, that's not because of anything other than it's just familiarity. I've been touring for so long. That being said, when this first happened, there was a lot of musicians that I would read about. They're just like, man, I feel like empty because I'm not able to be on stage, and all I want to do is play shows. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right with not playing shows. And it's not because I don't like to perform. It's not because I don't want to say thank you to the people that support it. But dude, I'm a really insular person, and I have battled with, to some degree, social anxiety since as far back as I can remember. It's allowed me to become a decent performer because there's a mask that you have to put on
Hmm.
in order to do it and not just be crushed by the reality of being a human being in front of a bunch of other human beings.
Yeah.
So I think that the second part to that answer would be yes, of course. The fundamental part of the anxiety of my career has been performing. I don't want to perform typically. I don't want to be on stage. It's like I don't like going on tour. When I'm on stage and I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, this is cool. I know how to do this, and that's the people, and I got it, right? But the way I go from that first part of the statement to the second part of the statement there is the same tenacity that I think I have had to learn through exercise or meditation or time management, like we had talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's the tenacity that gets you through it. It's the fact that the fastest way out is through. And I will also add to this statement that the only reason I've grown as a musician, as a person, I guess, is because I've had to do the things that I don't want to do. So conversely to my fear of performing, all the music that has come over the past couple of decades is because I've had to do it. I've forced myself to do it. So maybe you could also consider that the fear exists, and don't for a second think that that fear is exclusive to you. I think that's a huge part of it. But on the other side of that fear is often the things that I'm looking for. Like by getting through it and doing the things that I'm afraid to do on the other side of it, it's like, oh, wow. Now when I'm on autopilot with my writing, there's stuff coming to me here that is clearly a result of facing that. Yeah. In fact, the whole idea of facing one's fears is the overarching concept of the puzzle project.
That's awesome. That's super cool. I think that, like I still get nervous before every show I play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you'd be a sociopath if you weren't.
Yeah, right. And I feel like it's kind of a normal thing where it's like if you settle into an autopilot mode where you don't give a shit before playing shows, like something's not right. Like something has gone fundamentally wrong in this process.
I wonder if the idea of being a rock star is like a mental illness. Like if you're the type of character that's just like, I love this, man. Yeah. Everything in my life is about this. Hey guys, it's the me show starring me.
I also kill people.
Yeah, dude, it's like, and I'm sure you've run into people who are just like that sort of type A, super like apparently confident type. And I'm just like, wow, you're like a crazy person. I can't talk with you because you're always on, man.
It makes me wonder though, like how much of that is real. That's always been my thing.
It can't be
like that. Is I'm just like, is because it's like,
well, maybe it is.
Yeah, is I'm just like, I try to see myself in conversations, right? Where it's like that's how you interact with other people. Is it's like you find common ground and you interact and you find these things that maintain common interest. And with people that are like that, it's not that I can't find it, but I feel like I have to like dig a little and like get
your
through.
Witness to a performance is what I feel, like when I'm around these people, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is how the dynamic is you perform and I just laugh every now and then, right? I don't know,
the whole
but I mean
stage show.
But I also feel that there's a certain amount in my experience of the act of performing and the act of being in a band and the act of doing something that is so strange, really, when you think about it, that requires you to defend yourself against that energy. And then oftentimes it manifests in my experience with sort of like that sort of mask, right? Where it's you, but it's you.
Yeah, it's like a disassociation almost from I don't want to say reality because that's so corny, but like
the reality of being on stage is weird, man.
It is super weird, but it's like and it takes like that certain level of disassociation, at least in my experience, where it's like I'm doing something that I love doing and I'm doing it in front of people, and that scares the shit out of me when I think about it that way. So it's like I have to think about like the crowd as like an object, or like the whole experience as like something that falls outside of like the boundaries of how I usually look at things like that.
That's interesting. I mean, food for thought though. Maybe we can apply that same statement, because I'm gonna have to bolt here. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah,
it's
totally,
like,
no problem.
Maybe we can apply that same statement we had been volleying back and forth about the expression of creativity is one of gratitude to that live performance thing as well, because ultimately if you are singing songs that people have an emotional connection to, and that's helping them in a ideal sense that like it helps people, then really you're just doing a job.
Yeah.
And your job, if you're looking at it from a point of view of wanting to do a good job, it's like, well, how do I, again, get out of the way so that the song can be something that people participate with? Like the performances that I've done that are the worst are when I'm on stage apologizing for my self-awareness.
Right.
Like if I'm just performing, I'm in the flow and I'm like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's an exaggerated version of me, but it's not as much like a defense. But if I'm, every now and then, like I'll be on stage, I'll be like, I'm a human being holding a guitar in front of people, and it's super weird. And then all my on stage banter ends up being that, as opposed to like telling jokes or saying something that's like interesting.
Right.
Hopefully, I'm just on stage going, "Isn't this weird? Isn't this weird?
Yeah.
Isn't this weird?" And people like, "Yeah, now it is."
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
It's all a process, so we're just trying to figure it out. I think we all are.
Absolutely, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for hanging out and talking today.
You're welcome,
and pushing through the technical difficulties that we experienced earlier. I appreciate it.
It's part of it, right?
Yeah, man. It's
Well, take care of yourself, and thanks for the interview, and say hey to Nikki for me.
Absolutely. I totally will. For those of you watching, this has been Devin Townsend. I'm Riley McShane, host of the Metal Blade Live series, singer for Allegiant, and we will catch you all next time.
Ben. Yeah, you guys are good, man.